The hum of the transmitter is the only thing keeping me company right now, and I hope it's doing the same for you. My name is Elias Thorne. I'm sitting in a small basement studio just outside of Philadelphia, and if you can hear my voice, it means the emergency backup at the towers is still holding, even if everything else is letting go. It started small, didn't it? We all remember those first few reports coming out of the shipping ports in Savannah and Newark. They told us it was just a localized flu, something manageable, something the hospitals were ready for. But then the videos started leaking. Real people, not actors, filming from their windows in the middle of the night. You saw the same things I did. The way the streetlights seemed to flicker out one by one, not because of a power failure, but because nobody was left to fix the grids. I remember talking to a friend of mine, a guy named Marcus, who worked logistics for the rail lines in Chicago. He called me 3 weeks ago, his voice shaking, telling me that the trains weren't just delayed, they were being redirected to places that didn't exist on the public maps. He said the manifests were blank, and the engineers were being replaced by men in suits who didn't know how to drive a locomotive. That was the first time I felt that cold knot in my stomach. It wasn't just a sickness, it was a system-wide seizure. Now, I look out the reinforced glass of this booth, and the horizon is a color I can't quite name. It's a bruised purple, heavy with the smoke of 100 small fires that nobody is coming to put out. The silence is what gets you. You don't realize how loud a city is until the engines stop. No planes overhead, no distant rumble of the interstate, just the wind whipping through empty alleys and the occasional burst of static on the shortwave. I've been monitoring the government frequencies for the last 6 hours. There's nothing but a looped recording from a mid-level staffer at the CDC, her voice cracking as she tells people to stay indoors and wait for further instructions. But we know those instructions aren't coming. I got a message on the wire from a woman named Sarah in Denver before the internet went dark in the West. She said the National Guard didn't retreat, they just stopped taking orders. They took their gear and went home to protect their own front doors. Can you blame them? When the social contract rips in half, you don't look to the Capitol for help. You look at the person standing next to you and hope they're still human. I'm tired. My eyes feel like they've been rubbed with sandpaper, and the coffee went cold 5 hours ago. But I'm not turning this off. I've got enough fuel in the generator to keep us talking through the night. I want you to listen to the sound of my breathing if you have to, just to know there's someone else still drawing air. We heard reports from a guy named David in Baltimore earlier today. He saw the first barricades go up around the harbor. He said they weren't checking for the virus anymore. They were just stopping people from leaving. It's a containment strategy that feels more like a burial. The scientists on the underground boards, the ones who haven't disappeared yet, are calling this a highly contagious event. They use big words to hide the fact that they don't know how to stop it. They talk about R0 factors and protein spikes, but all we see is the fever that doesn't break and the way people look at each other with fear instead of pity. It's the suspicion that's killing us as much as the lungs giving out. If you're out there, if you're listening in a basement or a car or under a pile of blankets, stay with me. We're going to talk through the dark. We're going to document what's happening block by block until the lights go out for good. The light on my console is flickering, rhythmic and dying, like a heart that's forgotten why it's beating. I've been sitting here so long that the room feels like it's part of my skin. I heard from a man named Franklin in a small town outside of Seattle. Tacoma, I think he said. He was a retired plumber. He told me the pipes in his neighborhood started bursting 3 days ago, not from the cold, but from the pressure buildup, because the automated systems at the reservoir stuck in a loop. He described the sound of water gushing out into the streets as a shaking of the earth. He said he stood on his porch and watched a river of treated drinking water wash away the flower beds he'd spent 10 years tending. He wasn't even angry. He just said it was a waste of good water in a world that's gone thirsty. He's been collecting the runoff in old paint buckets just to have something to flush the toilet with. It's funny the things we prioritize when the walls start to lean in. I keep thinking about a conversation I had with a woman named Dr. Eris. She didn't say where she was, only that she was in a secure facility that wasn't feeling very secure anymore. She was a researcher in synthetic biology. She whispered into the radio, her voice sounding like dry leaves, telling me that the virus isn't just a sickness, it's a scavenger. She said it was designed, or it evolved, she wasn't sure which, to thrive on the very things that make us modern. It travels on the air currents created by our ventilation systems. It hitches rides on the plastic we touch. It's almost like it was built to dismantle the 21st century. She told me the military signals are almost entirely gone now. The last one I picked up was a broad-spectrum broadcast from a carrier group in the Atlantic. It wasn't a command. It was a request. They were asking if anyone at all, had a coordinate for a port that was still receiving survivors. There was no answer. I sat here and listened to them repeat the coordinates of the ship for 40 minutes, a billion-dollar machine of war reduced to a beggar on the waves. It makes you realize that power is an illusion. We only have power because we all agree to believe in it. Once that agreement ends, a carrier is just a floating piece of iron, and a president is just a person in a suit. I'm looking at my own reflection in the glass of the booth. I look like a stranger. My beard is matted, my eyes are sunken, and I have this look of permanent surprise on my face, like I'm still waiting for someone to tell me this is a drill. But the drill ended a long time ago. This is the main event.
The smell of the old coffee in the pot is starting to turn into something chemical, and I think the milk I used 2 days ago is finally losing its battle with the room temperature. I had a long talk on the shortwave with a woman named Elena in a town called Ojai out in California. She was a gardener, someone who spent her life working the soil. She told me the most haunting thing she's seen isn't the empty streets, but the way the domestic dogs are starting to pack up. She watched from her second-story window as a group of golden retrievers and labs, dogs that used to wear sweaters and sleep on velvet pillows, chased a deer through a suburban cul-de-sac. She said the look in their eyes wasn't mean, it was just focused. They've reverted to the old ways faster than we have. Elena said she's spent her time planting seeds in every bit of open dirt she can find, even the cracks in the sidewalk. She knows she might not be there to see them grow, but she wants the world to have flowers when this is over. She called it leaving a trail for the survivors. I keep hearing this theory from a guy who calls himself the Signal Man. He's been broadcasting on a loop from somewhere in the Midwest. He says the reason the military pulled back so fast wasn't just the infection rate among the troops, but a failure of the satellite navigation systems. He thinks the virus, or the chaos it caused, led to a lack of maintenance at the ground control stations, and now the GPS satellites are drifting out of their slots. If that's true, it means the high-tech world is literally losing its sense of direction. We're back to using paper maps and the stars, assuming we can see them through the haze. I talked to a man named Arthur in Maine, who told me he's been teaching his grandson how to use a compass. The boy asked why they couldn't just use the phone, and Arthur had to explain that the magic glass doesn't work when the gods are dead. It's a hard thing to explain to a kid that the world just stopped. I spoke to a woman named Beatrice in London, the one in England this time. She managed to get through on a patch that spanned 3 different relays. She told me that the big stone buildings, the ones that have stood for hundreds of years, look more natural now. Without the neon signs and the digital billboards, the city looks like it's slipping back into the 1800s. She said the silence at night is so deep you can hear the Thames River lapping against the stone banks from blocks away. But she also told me about the knockers. That's what she calls the people who go from door to door in the middle of the night. They don't try to break in, and they don't shout. They just knock 3 times and wait. If no one answers, they move to the next house. Beatrice says it's a way of checking who's still alive without wasting energy on a fight. It's a polite kind of predatory behavior that makes my skin crawl. I'm looking at the stack of journals I've been keeping since the first week. I've written down every name I've heard, every city, every little tip about which berries are safe or how to fix a leaky battery. It feels like I'm writing a manual for a world that doesn't exist yet. I had a message from a man named Oscar in New Orleans who told me the humidity is so thick the mold is growing on the inside of the windows. He's been living on a diet of canned shrimp and rainwater. He told me he spends his afternoons playing the trumpet from his balcony. He doesn't have an audience and nobody is throwing coins, but he says the music feels like it's holding the shadows back. He played a few notes for me over the radio, and for a second I forgot about the empty shelves and the cold generator. It was a beautiful, lonely sound. It reminded me that we're still here, even if we're just flickers in the dark. I'm going to stay on the line as long as the fuel holds. If you can hear the trumpet in your head, you're not alone.
I think the dust is settling in the vents because the air is starting to feel heavy, like it's being pressed down by a giant hand. I had a transmission about an hour ago from a man named Silas in a town called Flagstaff. He was a forest ranger before the world tilted. He told me that the silence in the mountains is different now. It's not the peaceful quiet of nature, it's a watchful silence. He said he stood on an overlook and watched the lights of the distant valley go out in a perfect, straight line, like someone was drawing a curtain across the horizon. Silas told me that he's been seeing smoke signals from the neighboring peaks, not from people he knows, but from strangers trying to coordinate. He said the language of the world has changed from emails and texts to fire and light. It's a primitive way to live, but at least fire doesn't need a server to stay lit. There's a theory floating around the emergency bands, shared by a guy who used to be a technician for a major cellular provider in Denver. His name is Leo. He thinks the collapse of the communication lines wasn't just about people getting sick and leaving their posts. He believes there was a massive software corruption, a cascading failure triggered by the sheer volume of people trying to say goodbye at the exact same moment. He said the servers literally choked on the grief of millions. I don't know if that's true, but there's something poetic about the idea that our feelings were too big for the machines to handle. I spoke to a woman named Naomi in a high-rise in Charlotte. She told me she's been living on the 20th floor and watching the city below go through its cycles. She said at night the city looks like a giant dead animal with the ribcage of the skyscrapers reflecting the moon. She saw a group of people in the park below her building trying to plant a garden in the middle of a baseball diamond. They were using flashlights and shovels, working in total silence. Naomi said it was the most hopeful thing she'd ever seen, people planting seeds for a tomorrow they might not even see. It's that kind of stubbornness that keeps me in this chair. We are a species that doesn't know when to quit, and maybe that's the only thing that will save us. If you're out there and you're still planting things, keep going. I'll keep talking until the lights go out. The vibration from the generator starting to rattle the loose pens on my desk, and it sounds like 1,000 tiny teeth chattering in the dark. I just got a scratchy patch through from a guy named Victor in a neighborhood just outside of Detroit. He was an auto worker, a man used to the sound of heavy machinery and the heat of the line. He told me the silence of the factories is what's driving him crazy.
He walked past the plant yesterday and said the gates were just swinging open, hitting the fence with a rhythmic metallic clang that you could hear for blocks. He saw a fox sitting right in the middle of the security booth, looking at him like he was the intruder. Victor said he's been spending his time collecting the discarded bicycles from the neighborhood and lining them up in his driveway. He doesn't know why he's doing it. Maybe just to have something to organize, something to fix that doesn't require electricity. He told me his biggest fear isn't the virus anymore. It's the thought that he might be the last person who remembers how to use a wrench. I've been hearing a lot of talk on the long-range frequencies about the dead zones in the communications grid. A woman named Sarah, who said she was a systems analyst for a big tech firm in Austin, told me that the internet didn't just die, it fractured. She said there are these little digital islands left, small local networks that are still humming because someone left a server running in a basement or a library. But they can't talk to each other. It's like the world has been cut into a million tiny pieces and we're all trapped on our own little shard of glass. Sarah told me she's been trying to bridge the gap between two of these islands using an old-fashioned radio relay. But the interference from the collapsing power lines is making it impossible. She said the air is full of ghost data, old messages and emails that are just bouncing around the atmosphere with nowhere to land. It's a haunted sky, full of "I love you" and "Where are you?" and "Please come home," sent by people who aren't there to receive them. I spoke to a man named Gabriel in a small town in New Mexico. He was a high school history teacher. He told me he's been spending his days at the local museum, sitting among the pottery and the stone tools of the people who lived there 1,000 years ago. He said it gives him perspective. He looks at a clay bowl and realizes that civilizations have ended before, and the world kept turning. The sun still rose over the mesa, and the rain still fell on the desert. He told me that we got too used to the fast world, the one where you could get anything you wanted in an hour and talk to anyone on the planet in a second. He thinks we're just being forced back into the slow world, and the transition is what's killing us. Gabriel said he's been teaching the few kids left in his street how to identify edible plants and how to track the movement of the stars. He isn't teaching them about the Roman Empire or the Industrial Revolution. He's teaching them how to survive the next 24 hours. My own arc of hope is starting to feel like a frayed rope. I look at the map on my wall and I see so many places where the voices have just stopped. I had a message from a woman named Maya in a suburb of Seattle who told me she's been living in her attic because the ground floor of her house feels too exposed. She said she watches the military drones fly over every few hours, but they don't drop anything. No food, no medicine, no flyers. They just hover, their little red lights blinking like angry eyes, and then they move on. She thinks they're just mapping the decline, recording the exact moment the lights go out in every house. Maya asked me if I thought there was anyone left in the bunkers who was actually watching the footage. I didn't know what to tell her. I want to believe there's a room full of people somewhere trying to figure out a way to save us, but the silence from the Capitol is pretty loud. If you're out there, Maya, keep your head down. Don't let the drones see you cry. We're still here, and as long as this needle is jumping, we're still part of the story.
Would you send GPS clear? Loud and clear.
The suspicious person, 4423 live, we'll get the mobile station.
On the intercom. C7?
Yes, ma'am, we'll be clear, and 233 will be clear on N4 E. Edward, and so we'll both be at 50.
The shadows in the corner of this booth are starting to look like people if I stare at them too long, so I've started focusing on the dust motes dancing in the glow of the signal light instead. I just had a very brief, very shaky connection with a man named Henry who is broadcasting from a high-rise in downtown Pittsburgh. He told me he's been watching the city bridges through a telescope. He said the bridges are completely clogged with vehicles that haven't moved in a week, but the strange thing is the lack of people. He doesn't see bodies, and he doesn't see survivors. He just sees thousands of open car doors. It's like everyone just decided to get out and walk into the river or the woods at the exact same moment.
Henry said he saw a single black bear walking across the Roberto Clemente Bridge yesterday morning, sniffing at the abandoned SUVs like they were just strange-shaped boulders. He told me the most unsettling part is how the wind whistles through the open car windows, creating a low, moaning sound that echoes off the glass buildings. It's a chorus of the empty. I heard a theory from a woman who managed to break through the static for 30 seconds. She called herself Dr. Eris, and she claimed she was a former researcher for a private defense contractor. She didn't have much time before her signal washed out, but she said the virus wasn't the incident itself, it was just the catalyst. She believes the real collapse is a result of a cascading failure of trust. She said the infrastructure was built on the assumption that we would always believe in the value of the dollar and the authority of the badge. Once the virus made us doubt the person standing next to us, the belief evaporated, and without belief, the machinery just grinds to a halt. It's a social engine that ran out of oil. I think about that when I look at the pile of paper money I used to keep in my desk for the vending machine. It's just colorful scrap paper now. I'd trade every $100 bill in this city for a single fresh orange or a gallon of clean fuel for the generator. I spoke to a man named Samuel in a small coastal town in South Carolina. He told me the sea is reclaiming the low-lying streets because the drainage systems are blocked with silt and trash. He's been living on the second floor of a bed and breakfast, watching the tide come further and further into the lobby every day. Samuel said he's not scared of the water, he's scared of the quiet that comes with it. He told me he found an old battery-operated keyboard, and he spends his nights playing simple melodies just to fill the space. He said the sound of a C major chord feels like a solid object in a world that's turned to liquid. He told me he saw a group of people on a distant pier trying to signal a passing freighter with a mirror, but the ship just kept moving, a dark shape on the horizon that didn't want any part of what was happening on the shore. That's the new rule of the road. Keep moving, and don't look back. I'm feeling a heavy sort of fatigue in my chest, a weight that makes it hard to take a full breath. I don't think I'm sick, at least I hope I'm not, but the stress of being the only voice in the room is starting to take its toll. I had a message from a woman named Julia in a suburb of Phoenix. She told me she's been spending her time cataloging the contents of her pantry like it's a museum. She has 3 cans of soup, a box of crackers, and a jar of peanut butter. She said she talks to the cans sometimes, giving them names and histories, just to keep her mind from wandering into the dark. Julia told me she saw a sunset last night that was so red it looked like the sky was bleeding. She said she felt a moment of intense beauty and intense terror at the same time, realizing that the world is going to go on being beautiful whether we're here to see it or not. That's a hard truth to swallow. We like to think we're the main characters, but maybe we're just a footnote in a very long book. I'm going to try to stay awake for another hour. If you're listening, Julia, I hope you found a way to make that peanut butter last.
The hum of the transmitter is getting deeper, like a low growl in the floorboards. I just spent the last 20 minutes trying to fix a leak in the ceiling with some old duct tape I found in the supply closet. The water's clear, which is good, but it's cold, and it's dripping right over the electronics. I keep thinking about a man named Thomas I spoke to in a rural part of Pennsylvania. He was a retired line worker for the electric company. He told me he spent 40 years of his life making sure that when people flipped a switch, the dark stayed away. He sounded heartbroken. He said he stood on his porch and watched the last transformer in his valley blow. It made a sound like a giant bell ringing once, and then the lights in the distance just bled out into nothing. He told me that for the first time in his life he felt like he'd failed at his job, even though there was nothing he could have done. He's been spending his time now walking the length of the lines with a pair of binoculars, just looking for where the wire snapped, as if knowing the exact spot would make it easier to handle.
I've been hearing a lot of chatter about the long night on the emergency bands. It's not a weather event, but a psychological one. A woman named Sarah, who was a psychologist in Boston, managed to get a burst of audio through a relay station. She said the human brain isn't wired for this kind of sustained isolation. She thinks we're seeing a total breakdown of the collective ego. When you take away the stores, the jobs, and the regular faces on the news, people start to lose their sense of who they are. They become shadows of themselves. Sarah told me she's been spending her time watching people in her neighborhood just sitting on their front steps, staring at the empty road for hours, not moving, not speaking. They aren't sick, at least not with the virus. They're just hollowed out by the silence. It's like the world stopped being a place they recognized, so they stopped trying to be people who live in it. I talked to a guy named Ben in a small town in Idaho. He's a hunter, someone who knows how to move through the brush without making a sound. He told me the animals are behaving in ways he's never seen. He saw a buck walk right up to a gas station pump and sniff it for 5 minutes before moving on. He said the mountain lions are coming down into the valleys earlier than usual, and they aren't afraid of the houses anymore. Ben told me he's been sleeping in a tree stand because it feels safer than being on the ground. He's worried that as the food in the houses runs out, the line between the woods and the suburbs is going to disappear completely. He told me his biggest worry isn't the predators, though. It's the lack of sound. He said he used to be able to hear his own heart beating when he's sitting in the woods. It's a sound that reminds you you're alive, but it also reminds you how easy it is to stop. My voice is starting to crack, and I can feel the weight of every word I've said since I sat down in this chair. I'm thinking about a woman named Maria in a high-rise in Chicago. She said she's been watching the lake from her window. She said the water looks cleaner than she's ever seen it, a deep, piercing blue. But she also saw a group of people down on the beach yesterday, trying to build a fire out of driftwood and old park benches. She said they looked so small against the backdrop of the empty city. It's the scale of it all that gets you. We built these massive, towering monuments to ourselves, and now we're just ants crawling over the ruins of our own ambition. Maria said she's been spending her time writing letters to people she'll never meet, tucking them into the pages of books in the building's communal library. She wants someone to know that she was there, that she saw the blue water and the small fires. I'm going to keep this signal going as long as I can. If you're out there and you're feeling small, just remember that I'm still here too. We're still part of the noise.
The shadows in the corners of this room are getting longer, and I'm starting to wonder if the sun is actually setting or if the haze over the city is just getting that thick. I heard from a listener named Ben over in Allentown about an hour ago. He managed to get a signal through on an old CB radio. He sounded older, maybe in his 60s, and he told me that his neighborhood had gone completely dark. Not just the lights, but the people. He said he watched from his attic window as his neighbors packed their cars in total silence. No shouting, no crying, just the sound of trunks slamming and tires crunching over the glass on the pavement. That's the stage we're at now. The screaming has stopped because everyone realized that nobody is coming to help. We've moved past the panic and into this weird, heavy stillness. It's like the whole world is holding its breath, waiting to see who falls over next. I tried to tell Ben to stay put, but I don't know if he heard me through the hiss. I spent the last hour trying to patch into the emergency satellite feeds, the ones the military uses when the ground lines fry. All I found was a repeating signal from a base in Nebraska. It wasn't a message, it was just a heartbeat, a rhythmic pulse that tells you the equipment is working, but the person behind the desk is gone.
It makes you think about the people who were supposed to be in charge. You see the empty podiums on the news channels before the screens go to snow, and you realize those people were just as scared as we are. They had the fancy titles and the secure bunkers, but they couldn't negotiate with a virus that doesn't care about borders or bank accounts. A friend of mine who used to consult for the Department of Energy once told me that the power grid is a just-in-time system. It only works if people show up to work every single day to balance the load. If 3% of the workforce stays home, the lights flicker. If 10% stays home, the grid collapses. We're way past 10% now. I'm looking at a map of the tri-state area I pinned to the wall when this started. I've been marking it with red ink every time I get a confirmed report of a total blackout or a dead zone. The red is starting to swallow the blue and green. I got a report from a nurse named Elena in a hospital in North Jersey. She didn't want to give her last name. She told me the staff didn't quit because they were lazy or scared of getting sick. They quit because there was nothing left to give the patients. No oxygen, no fluids, no beds. She said she spent her last shift just holding people's hands and telling them stories about the beach until they stopped moving. That's the part the official broadcasts don't tell you. They talk about mitigation and resource allocation, but they don't talk about the sound of a hospital that has run out of everything. Elena is walking home now, or trying to. She said the highways are just long graveyards of stalled cars, and the only way to move is on foot. My hand is shaking a little as I reach for the dial. I think it's the lack of food, or maybe just the weight of it all. I've got a small battery-operated clock on the desk, and the ticking sounds like a hammer hitting an anvil. Every second feels longer than the one before it. I keep thinking about the grocery store down the street from my house. 2 weeks ago, people were arguing over a gallon of milk. A week ago, they were breaking the windows. Today, it's just an empty shell. The door is swinging in the wind, stripped bare. It's amazing how fast the things we take for granted just vanish. You don't think about the supply chain until you can't find a piece of bread. You don't think about the social order until you realize the police sirens haven't wailed in 48 hours. It's just us now. If you're listening to this, you are the last of the witnesses. You are the ones who have to remember what it felt like when the world was loud and bright. I'm going to try to catch my breath for a minute, maybe see if I can find a different frequency. Stay close to your radio. Don't let the silence win.
I found a transmission a few minutes ago that I can't get out of my head. It wasn't a voice, just a series of automated tones coming from a weather station near the coast. It kept repeating a high tide warning for a pier that I know for a fact washed away 3 days ago. There's something incredibly lonely about machines talking to machines while the people they were built for are hiding in the dark. I think about the engineers who designed those sensors, the guys who climbed the towers in the rain to make sure the data was accurate. They're probably sitting in a dark living room somewhere now, or they're one of the shadows moving through the trees. It's the infrastructure of a ghost world. I'm sitting here in this basement, and I can hear the pipes groaning in the walls. Without the city water pressure to keep things moving, the building feels like it's dying from the inside out. It's a hollow, metallic sound, like a giant rib cage settling into the dirt. I received a handwritten note pushed under the door of the station entrance about 20 minutes ago. It was from a man named Gregory who lives 3 blocks over. He didn't want to come inside, he just wanted to tell me that the birds have stopped singing in his garden. He said he noticed it yesterday afternoon. Usually the sparrows are a nuisance, but now it's just nothing. It's like the animals knew to leave before we did. Gregory wrote that he's heading north toward the mountains because he heard a rumor that the cold slows the spread. I want to believe him.
I want to tell you all to pack a bag and head for the snow, but the truth is, we don't know. I've heard theories from people who claim to be former military virologists saying the virus thrives in the humidity, and I've heard others say it's the dry air that lets it hang in the sky like a fog. When the experts disappear, the rumors become our only science, and that's a dangerous way to live. I'm thinking about a girl named Maya I spoke to via Apache landline in Cincinnati before the wires went dead there. She was only 16. She told me she was looking after her younger brother because her parents went out for medicine and never came back. She wasn't crying. That was the scariest part. She was just listing the things she had left: 3 cans of peaches, a half-gallon of bottled water, and a flashlight with fading batteries. She asked me if I knew when the reset was happening. That's what they're calling it in some of the shelters, the reset. Like someone is just going to flip a switch and the grocery stores will be full again and the internet will come back on and we'll all go back to our jobs and our morning routines. I didn't have the heart to tell her that there is no switch. We are living in the after, and the before is drifting away like smoke. I told her to keep her brother quiet and to stay away from the windows. I hope she's still there. I hope she found a way to open those peaches. The political chatter is gone. There are no more press briefings from the Rose Garden, no more emergency alerts on your phone. They stopped those because they didn't want to document the failure in real time. The last thing I heard from a source in D.C., a guy who used to work in legislative affairs, was that the continuity of government plan failed because the people designated to go to the bunkers chose to stay with their families instead. It's a strange kind of comfort, knowing that even at the highest levels, the instinct to hold on to the people you love beat out the instinct to preserve the state. But it leaves us in a vacuum. There is no law now except for what you carry in your heart and what you're willing to do to see tomorrow. I see the flickers of campfires on the hillsides outside of town. People are gathering in small groups, trying to find safety in numbers, but every new person is a threat. Every cough is a death sentence. Every stranger is a carrier. We are being torn apart by our need for each other and our fear of each other at the exact same time.
The static is getting heavier now. A thick blanket of white noise that feels like it's trying to swallow the room. I have to keep adjusting the gain just to hear myself breathe over the hum. I got a report through a shortwave relay from a man named Thomas in Pittsburgh. He was a retired electrical engineer, someone who understood the guts of the world. He told me the silence in the city is being broken by something he called the singing. It's the sound of the high-tension power lines vibrating in the wind because there's no load on them anymore. He said it's a low, mourning sound that carries for miles in the empty air. Thomas didn't sound scared. He just sounded tired of the noise. He told me he'd spent 40 years keeping the lights on for people who never knew his name, and now he was watching the transformers blow out one by one like birthday candles. When the grid goes, it doesn't just go dark. It dies in a series of bright blue flashes that light up the horizon for a second before leaving you blinder than you were before. I keep thinking about the infrastructure we built and how fragile it actually was. We lived in a world held together by invisible threads, truck drivers moving fruit, technicians monitoring water pressure, pilots navigating the invisible highways in the sky. It only took 10 days for those threads to snap. I heard an eyewitness account from a woman named Chloe in Seattle. She managed to record a voice memo on her phone and broadcast it on a loop before her battery gave out. She described the green zones the military tried to set up in the city parks. They promised food, water, and medicine, but they didn't have enough for the first 100 people, let alone the thousands that showed up. She said the panic didn't start with a fight. It started with a collective realization that the men in the uniforms were just as hungry and just as sick as the people they were guarding. Once the authority of the uniform faded, the city just dissolved. Chloe said she saw people trading diamond rings for a single bottle of aspirin.
Value has shifted. Gold doesn't matter if you can't breathe. There's a theory floating around the darker channels, shared by people who claim they were in the room when the first samples were analyzed at Fort Detrick. They're saying this wasn't an accident, but it wasn't a weapon either. They're calling it a biological correction. They say the virus is too perfect, too efficient at jumping from person to person without showing its face for weeks. It's like the Earth decided to change the locks and didn't give us the new keys. It's hard not to feel like a ghost when you hear stuff like that. I'm sitting here in this chair, surrounded by the technology of a dead era, talking to people I can't see. I wonder if I'm the only one left in this building. I haven't heard a footstep in the hallway since Tuesday. The water in the taps has turned a rusty brown, and it smells like the bottom of a pond. I've started collecting rainwater in buckets on the fire escape, watching the droplets hit the plastic, and thinking about how something so simple has become the most valuable thing I own. I miss the mundane things. I miss the sound of a lawnmower on a Saturday morning. I miss the smell of exhaust fumes in a traffic jam. I miss the way people used to complain about the weather. Now, the weather is the only thing that doesn't feel like an enemy. I spoke to a guy named Sam in Memphis who was hiding out in a high-rise office building. He told me he spends his days watching the sunrise over the Mississippi River and realizing he'd never actually looked at it before. He was too busy looking at his phone, his spreadsheets, his life. Now his life is just survival, and the river is the only thing that looks the same as it did a month ago. He told me he saw a group of people down on the banks trying to build a raft out of office furniture. They wanted to float south, thinking maybe the heat would kill the bug, or maybe they just wanted to be moving. It's the movement that keeps the despair at bay. If you stop, you start thinking. And if you start thinking, you start realizing how long the road back is going to be, if there even is a road. I had to tighten the screws on the window frames a few minutes ago because the wind started picking up, and it makes this high whistling sound that mimics a human scream if you listen to it too long. My mind is playing tricks on me. I keep thinking I hear a car door closing out in the parking lot, or the heavy thud of the mail delivery, but when I look at the monitors, the asphalt is empty. The only thing moving out there is a plastic bag caught on a fence, flapping like a trapped bird. I got a signal from a man named Arthur in a small town outside of Bristol over in the UK. He was using a maritime radio. He told me the coastal towns are being hit by a different kind of quiet. He said the ships are just sitting out there on the water, dozens of them, tankers and containers, just drifting because the crews are either too sick to steer or they've decided to drop anchor and wait for a world that isn't burning. Arthur said he watched through binoculars as a small fire started on one of the decks, and nobody even tried to put it out. They just watched it glow against the black water until it burnt itself down to the waterline. The political experts who were still talking a few days ago mentioned something called strategic withdrawal. It's a fancy way of saying the people in charge have gone into holes in the ground and pulled the ladders up behind them. They've moved to the bunkers in the mountains, places like Raven Rock or the underground complexes in the Urals, thinking they can wait us out. They have air filtration systems and years of freeze-dried food, while we're sitting here wondering if the last can of beans in the pantry is worth the risk of opening the front door. But there's a rumor, something I heard from a guy named Victor who used to work in satellite maintenance, that the bunkers aren't the paradise they thought they'd be. He said the virus doesn't need a door to get in. It just needs one person who lied about a cough during the intake screening. If that's true, then the last remnants of the old government are just trapped in very expensive tombs. There is no escaping this, not even under 1,000 feet of granite. I'm looking at a photo on my desk of my niece's birthday party from last year. Everyone is crowded around a cake, laughing, their faces smeared with icing. It feels like a picture from 1,000 years ago. I wonder where they all are. I tried calling my sister in Ohio for 3 days straight until the dial tone finally turned into that flat, dead hiss that means the switching station has lost power. I have to believe they're okay. I have to believe they found a way to the woods or a farm where the air is clear. I spoke to a woman named Maria in San Antonio who told me she's been living in her basement with 3 other families she didn't even know before the collapse. She said they don't talk much, they just sit in the dark and take turns sleeping. She said the hardest part isn't the hunger or the thirst, it's the way the silence feels like a weight on your chest. You start to forget the sound of your own voice. That's why I'm still talking. I'm talking so I don't disappear. I heard a report from a guy named Julian in Toronto. He was a university student, and he's been keeping a log of the local militias that are popping up. He said they aren't what you'd expect. They aren't soldiers, they're just fathers and sons with hunting rifles and orange vests, standing at the end of their driveways. They aren't trying to take over the world, they're just trying to keep the world from coming into their living rooms. Julian said the desperation is turning people into things they don't recognize. He saw a man trade a functional car for a box of antibiotics that were probably expired. We are losing our grip on the reality of value. A car is useless if there's no gas and nowhere to go. A box of pills is everything if your child is burning up with a fever. The social order didn't break all at once. It's fraying, one desperate choice at a time. I can feel the fatigue settling into my bones now, a kind of tiredness that sleep won't fix. It's the exhaustion of watching a house burn down and knowing you're still inside it.
The generator is coughing again, a rhythmic metal-on-metal sound that makes me think the oil is getting thin. I'm sitting here in the dark, save for the dull amber glow of the control board, and I'm realizing that I haven't seen a light in the windows across the street for 48 hours, not even a candle. It's like the neighborhood has just been erased. I had a guy named Oscar reach out to me from a ham radio set in New Orleans. He told me the water is rising, not because of a storm, but because the pumps finally gave out and there's nobody to clear the debris. He said the city is reclaimed by the swamp, and the sound of the frogs at night is so loud it drowns out the sound of the looters. Oscar told me he's staying on his roof with a solar charger and a shotgun. He said he saw a military transport plane go down in the distance 3 days ago, but there was no explosion, no smoke. It just glided down into the trees like it ran out of will. There's a theory I heard from a woman named Claire who claimed to be a biologist at a university in London before everything shuttered. She managed to get a burst transmission through a satellite relay. She said the virus isn't just attacking the respiratory system, it's attacking the part of the brain that handles social cohesion. She called it induced isolation syndrome. She thinks the virus evolved to make us afraid of the very thing that helps us survive, each other. Every time we pull away from a hand reached out in help, the virus wins. Every time we lock the door and let a neighbor starve, the virus wins. It's a terrifying thought that a microscopic string of proteins could dictate our morality. I want to tell Claire she's wrong, that humans are better than that. But then I look at the news feeds that used to be full of stories of heroism and are now just empty static. I'm thinking about a man named Robert I spoke to in Detroit. He was a foreman at a steel mill. He told me he went to the local precinct to ask for help when the grocery stores were being emptied, and he found the doors wide open and the desks empty. There wasn't a struggle. There were just half-eaten sandwiches and coffee cups left on the tables. The police simply went home to be with their families. That's the story of this collapse. It wasn't a war, it was a mass departure. We all just decided at different times that the jobs we had didn't mean anything compared to the people we loved. But without those jobs, the water stops, the power dies, and the food rots in the trucks. We traded the world for a few more hours of being together, and now we're finding out how cold that trade really is.
Robert said he's been spending his time walking the floor of the silent mill just to hear the echo of his own boots. He says the silence of the machinery is the loudest thing he's ever heard. I'm starting to lose track of the days. The clock on the wall says it's Thursday, but the sun looks like it's in the wrong place. Maybe it's just the smoke. I had a message from a kid named Leo in Phoenix. He must have been 10 or 11. He said the heat is becoming unbearable without the air conditioning, and his neighborhood has started sleeping in the streets because the houses are like ovens. He said they all lay out on the asphalt at night looking at the stars because the light pollution is gone for the first time in a century. He told me the Milky Way looks like a bright river of milk. There was a weird kind of hope in his voice, like he was seeing something beautiful in the middle of a nightmare. I wish I could see the stars from here, but I'm buried in this concrete box, listening to the world rattle its chains. I'm going to try to eat some of this dried fruit I found in the bottom of my bag. It's hard as a rock, but it's something. If you're listening, tell me what you see outside your window. Tell me there's still something left to look at.
I just had a long silence on the headset, listening to the static, and I realized I was waiting for a commercial break that's never going to happen. Those habits die hard. I remember when the biggest problem I had was a dead battery in my car, or a long line at the bank. It feels like a different life. I got a message a few minutes ago from a woman named Hannah in a small town near the border of Vermont. She told me the local radio station there went silent yesterday, but before it did, the host played a recording of a thunderstorm for 3 hours. No talking, no news, just the sound of rain and rolling thunder. She said it was the most peaceful thing she'd heard since the lockdowns began. Now she's sitting on her porch watching the forest. She said the deer are coming right up to the houses now. They aren't afraid of us anymore. Maybe they can sense that we've lost our place at the top of the pile. There's a story going around the shortwave from a guy who calls himself the Professor. He says he was part of a think tank in D.C. that studied infrastructure vulnerability. He claims that the real reason the internet went down wasn't the virus or a lack of workers, but a deliberate kill switch used by the authorities to prevent the spread of mass panic. He says they thought that if we couldn't see the world falling apart in real time on our screens, we'd stay calm and stay put. But all it did was leave us in the dark with our own imaginations, which are much scarier than any video. If that's true, it backfired in the worst way possible. People didn't stay calm, they just felt abandoned. I spoke to a man named Simon in Atlanta who told me he watched the local news anchor walk off the set during a live broadcast. The guy just took off his mic, looked into the camera, and said, "I need to go find my daughter." And then the screen went to a test pattern. That was the last thing Simon saw on a television. I'm looking at the water level in my buckets. It's not enough. It's never enough. I heard from a guy named Victor in a suburb of London, Ontario, not the UK, who said he's been distilling water using a homemade solar still on his roof. He sounded proud of it, like it was a grand achievement. And in a way, it is. We're all back to basics now. We're learning how to survive like our great-grandparents did, but without the community they had. I keep hearing about the silence in the big cities. A woman named Rachel in New York City managed to get a signal out from a rooftop in Manhattan. She said the city doesn't smell like trash or exhaust anymore. It smells like the ocean. With the subways flooded and the cars stopped, the salt air is finally reaching the streets. But she also said the silence is terrifying. When a single brick falls from a building, it sounds like a gunshot. When a dog barks 3 miles away, you can hear it perfectly. It's the sound of a graveyard that hasn't been filled yet. My throat is getting dry and my voice sounds like someone is dragging a rake over gravel. I'm thinking about a guy I knew back in college who was obsessed with prepping.
We all used to laugh at him, tell him he was wasting his time and money on dehydrated eggs and water filters. I wonder where he is now. He's probably the only one of us who isn't surprised. I talked to a woman named Sarah in a rural part of Kentucky. She told me her town is completely blocked off the roads with felled trees. They aren't letting anyone in, not even people they know from the next town over. It's a hard thing to hear, that we've turned into a collection of little fortresses. But she said it's the only way they feel safe. They have a communal garden and a well, and they're trying to pretend the rest of the world isn't vanishing. I asked her what she misses most, and she said she misses the sound of a jet engine. She misses looking up and knowing that people were going somewhere. Now everyone is just where they are, and where we are is all we have left.
The walls of this booth feel like they're closing in, and the air is getting thin. I tried to crack the window earlier, but the sound from the street made me close it real fast. It wasn't shouting or fighting. It was just the sound of 1,000 loose pieces of paper blowing down the asphalt, scratching like fingernails. I got a message from a man named Julian in a suburb of Seattle. He told me he spent the afternoon sitting in his car in his garage, just listening to an old CD he found in the glove box. He said he didn't want to go inside his house because the silence in the rooms was too heavy to carry. He told me about his neighbor, a woman named Mrs. Gable, who used to bake bread every Sunday. Julian said he walked over to check on her, and her front door was wide open, the house perfectly clean, but she was just gone. No sign of a struggle, no bags packed. It's like people are just evaporating into the shadows. That's the most haunting part of this, the way the world is emptying out without any ceremony. I managed to catch a brief flickering signal from a short-wave operator in Japan named Kenji. It was mostly static, but he kept repeating one phrase in broken English: "The lights are out on the mountain." I think he was talking about Fuji. If the shrines and the stations on the mountains are dark, then the heart of that place has stopped beating too. It's a global heart attack. There's a military theory I heard from a guy who claimed to be an ex-NSA analyst, a man named Miller. He's been hopping frequencies for days. He says the reason the communications went down so fast wasn't just the lack of maintenance. He believes there was a massive electromagnetic surge, a deliberate one, meant to keep the virus from being coordinated. It sounds like a conspiracy, but when you look at how fast the world went mute, it starts to make sense. They didn't just want to stop the panic, they wanted us to stop talking to each other. They wanted us isolated, because isolated people are easier to manage, or easier to forget. I'm looking at the clock again. It's been 3 hours since I heard another human voice on the headset. I talked to a woman named Clara in Chicago before the line cut. She was hiding in the basement of a library. She told me she was surrounded by thousands of books, all the knowledge of the human race, and none of it could tell her how to fix a broken water pipe or how to stop the coughing in the next room. She said she was reading a book about the stars just to keep her mind off the cold. She told me the most beautiful thing she'd read was that the light from the stars we see tonight actually left them millions of years ago. It means we're looking at the past. Maybe that's what I'm doing right now, talking into a microphone, sending my voice out into a world that's already gone, hoping that someone in the future hears the echo of what we used to be. Clara's voice was so soft I could barely hear it over the sound of the wind rattling the library vents. I hope she found a warm blanket. I'm starting to feel the fever myself, or maybe it's just the stress. My forehead feels like it's made of hot lead, and my hands won't stop shaking. I keep thinking about the last time I went to the grocery store, how I complained about the price of eggs. What I wouldn't give for a single cracked egg right now. I heard from a guy named Derek in a small town in Georgia. He said the local high school football field has been turned into a makeshift camp, but there's no one there to run it. It's just a sea of tents and abandoned suitcases.
He said the wind catches the tent flaps and makes them sound like 1,000 people clapping at once. It's a standing ovation for an empty world. Derek told me he's moving toward the coast, hoping to find a boat. He thinks the water is the only safe place left. I didn't tell him about the ships Arthur saw in Bristol. I didn't want to take away his last bit of hope. Sometimes a lie is the only thing that keeps a person walking.
The generator's making a new sound now, a sort of high-pitched whine that sets my teeth on edge. But as long as the needles on the console are in the green, I'm staying right here. I had a brief, scratchy conversation with a man named Silas in a rural part of Wyoming. He was calling from a ranger station. He told me the silence out there is different from the silence in the cities. He said the forest is reclaiming the roads faster than anyone would believe. Without the constant hum of traffic and the salt from the plows, the cracks in the pavement are already sprouting green. Silas said he watched a pack of wolves wander right across the interstate at noon. They weren't hunting, they just looked confused, like they were waiting for the noise to start up again. It makes you realize that we were the ones keeping the world in a certain shape, and without us, it's just sagging back into something wild and indifferent. I've been thinking about a report I heard from a military contractor named Hayes, who was stationed at a fuel depot in Virginia. He told me that before the chain of command disintegrated, they were ordered to dump thousands of gallons of fuel rather than let it fall into unauthorized hands. He said he watched a fortune in gasoline soak into the dirt while people a few miles away were freezing in their homes. It's that kind of logic that accelerated the collapse. The fear of losing control was greater than the desire to help. Hayes told me he walked away after the second night of that. He just left his post, took his service rifle, and started walking toward his parents' house in the Carolinas. He hasn't seen another person in uniforms for a week. He said the country feels like a giant, empty house where the owners left the stove on. I spoke to a woman named June in Minneapolis. She was a school teacher. She told me the hardest part for her was the morning the bells didn't ring. She's lived across the street from the elementary school for 20 years, and that bell was the heartbeat of her neighborhood. When it stayed silent, she knew the world had actually ended. She spent the morning walking through the empty classrooms, looking at the drawings still taped to the walls, pictures of sons with smiley faces and stick-figure families. She said she found a lunchbox left on a desk, and it felt like a holy relic. June isn't leaving. She said she's going to stay there and keep the library open, even if no one comes in to check out a book. She wants there to be a place that still looks like it belongs to people. I think about June every time I look at the dust gathering on the spare chairs in this studio. We are the curators of a museum that no one is visiting. The political theories are getting uglier on the open bans. There are people claiming that the virus was a side effect of a botched carbon capture experiment, and others saying it was a deliberate move to solve the population crisis. I don't know if I believe any of that. It feels too organized. When you look at how messy this is, how chaotic the infrastructure failure has been, it feels more like a mistake than a plan. I think we just pushed the system until it snapped, and we didn't have a backup. A guy named Caleb in St. Louis told me he's been spending his nights on the roof of a parking garage watching the fires in the distance. He said you can tell which neighborhoods are still trying to hold on by the way the fires are contained. In some places, they just let the whole block go. In others, you can see people in the distance forming bucket brigades by the light of the moon. It's those little flickers of cooperation that make me want to keep this microphone live. As long as someone is still carrying a bucket, I should still be talking.